CEO of the AMP Foundation, and David Crosby, the CEO of the Community Council of Australia, to launch the third edition of the Australia We Want report. If you'd like to come and do that.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted we could all be here today and join us together in this place, Canberra, this meeting place. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, the Ngambri and the Ngunnawal peoples, and recognise that in this area and the surrounds, there are so many different languages that it's really interesting and important that we too all come from different backgrounds and political persuasions and ideas and ambitions for the sector. And so, like those many languages for this area, maybe by the end of today, we'll all be speaking the same language as it relates to charities. So we are here to launch the third edition of the Australia We Want report, but it's in context of the main event, which is the Charities and Not-for-Profit Pre-Election Forum. So I'd like to recognise Dr. Leigh and Senator Dean Smith. I'd also like to acknowledge my chair, Alexis George, and just Tim Costello, who's chair of CCA, is unable to join us today because he sends his apologies. He's leading a very special tour, a walking tour in the steps of St. Paul through Greece and Turkey. So the AMP Foundation funded the third edition of this Australia We Want report because we admire the vision of those 60 initial not-for-profit leaders who, in 2015, took the time to pause from solving all those social issues they were experiencing day in and day out, and they looked to the future. They wanted to consider what core values would make Australia the place we would all want to live in. The report shows us where progress has been made and where there are still deficits. And I believe that the robust nature of the research really provides us with certainty on where to focus next. The core values of the report resonate with AMP Foundation. It gives us clarity for the direction of our philanthropy, because we want to be part of making that positive difference in the lives of individuals and families across this wonderful nation. Pleasingly, in the report, some of the measures have increased, notably educational attainment and employment access. They're tracking in the right direction. But the report also reveals that Australia is going backwards in some of the key measures. Three areas jumped out to me when I was working through the report. First one, on the upside, women are making up more and more of the workforce, and the gender pay gap is very slowly narrowing, but it's narrowing. But the report tells us that Australian women feel less safe than women in other countries. Indeed, in the list of OECD, we are 35 out of 41 countries. So why do women in our country feel so unsafe? Educational improvement is attainment is improving for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, but 1/3 of our prisoners are Indigenous, and 80% of those prisoners have not reached a secondary level of education. So there's a connection there somewhere that I think we need to really focus on. And sadly, Australians are becoming less generous. We're less likely to volunteer, we are giving less to charities, and also as a nation, we are allocating a lower percentage of our overall national income to poorer countries, and that is less than most OECD members. So no doubt on an individual basis and for families, it is the cost of living crisis, but that still doesn't actually change the fact that the charities still need to be supported, especially at times like this in a crisis, because they are normally the backbone of those communities where people live, and they are relied on more and more as the funds and disposable income of individuals and families in this cost of living crisis decreases. The AMP Foundation, we're very pleased. We actually made an additional $2.5 million donation to charities this year, specifically for cost of living, because we also want to continue to support community cohesiveness. You know, and when you're under stress, there's a lack of cohesiveness. And we also value happiness, which we think is a very sort of underrated human condition. Charities and NGOs, they are so much more in modern times and than simply a good-willed organisation who meet people at times of crisis. They are a key ingredient in a flourishing and inclusive society. Charity leaders believe that Australia can be a better place if governments at all levels look beyond the simple economic measures of success and invest time, effort and energy in making Australia a fairer, more inclusive, creative and generous country. But it is an ongoing journey. It is not difficult. It is very difficult to become stronger and resilient. But certainly, even though not an easy road, as it says in the report, it's a journey we all need to imagine, we need to plan for it, we need to enact it, and then we need to monitor. It is about owning our future and creating the Australia we all want. So finally, before I hand over to David Crosbie, who's CEO of Community Council of Australia, it is my great pleasure to officially launch the third edition of the Australia We Want report. I really encourage everyone here to read it, to discuss it, to align with its measures, and so that together we can have the impact we want across Australia and make it meaningful for those people that we are ultimately trying to help. So thank you. We are officially launched. So just a few words about CCA. Community Council of Australia is a pivotal organisation providing a national voice and facilitation for charities and non-government organisations so they can have an even greater impact together. Over many years, under the stewardship of David, CCA has created opportunities for sector leaders to come together and collaborate on what I believe are the big, ingrained and systemic social justice issues facing Australians. CCA is deeply trusted, and it has a reputation for working positively and productively with government and all other stakeholders because their aim is to find solutions. And most importantly, they also share very important stories of impact. They enable Australians to see the positive in community solutions in otherwise challenging times. So please join me in welcoming David.
Thanks, Nicola, and you'll be pleased to know I'm going to be very quick because I think this is a very important event. But let me start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I think anyone reading the Australia We Want report will see the work that we still have to do with our Indigenous population. And I want to thank all of you for being here. It's quite remarkable to me that within a week across Easter, Morris is looking at me strangely, but within a week across Easter with Anzac Day coming up, there's over 100 people in the room. I was thinking I might have to ring my friends from the tennis club and all the people I know in my street and try and get them here. We haven't had to call on one of my friends, although there are many friends in the crowd. So thank you for being here. I think it's very important that the sector is known and recognised as a significant part of Australia's national agenda. And on that note, I want to thank Morris and Julie for allowing us the privilege of being in what is a very special place, very important part of Australia's public discourse to be at the National Press Club. So thanks for that. I also want to thank Nicola and Lex from the AMP Foundation. And I know Peter Shergold's in the room. Nicola, Peter have been long-time supporters of CCA, and we really appreciate it. And we have at CCA a very small but very dynamic team. And I wanted to thank Deb and Nick and Sue Reagan, who can't be here. But I think at times we thought we wouldn't be here and the book wouldn't be here, but it all came together. And Nick, I think it looks really good, so you've done a really good job on the layout and the design, so thanks for that. I don't want to go through the results. I could talk about some of the things that annoy me, the alarming things in this report, the way we're going backwards in certain areas. I think what I wanted to do very briefly is talk about what it was like when we first came together to do this report and why we did it. Now, I know it's David Locks here, who was in the room helping us put together this set of values that we thought were important. And the reason we came together to put together something built on values is that we were concerned about the kind of dog-eat-dog competition to see who can achieve the biggest bank balance as an individual, as a measure of your individual success or your individual worth. And we talked about Australia as though all that mattered was the economy, instead of the economy being there to serve all our unique and wonderful communities. So in this election campaign and in previous election campaigns, I often find myself thinking, seriously, guys, you're offering me $10 off petrol or $10 off tax, and that's what we vote on, rather than the quality of our health or our education systems or the opportunities we can provide our kids. At times I just find the lack of values in our public discourse of concern. And to have 60 leaders from across the sector come together and focus on those values and then say, okay, let's measure them. Let's not just have a set of words, motherhood words we can all agree to. And so I'd encourage you to read the report, look at the measures, and think about really, are we creating the kind of Australia we want to live in? And if not, what's our role? And if we look even at just one area, if we take incarceration rates, for me, and you know, I've taught in prisons, I've worked running drug treatment services. Incarceration rates, for me, are an indicator of the failure, firstly, of our health and education systems. And then for people who fall through those systems, the social welfare and support structures that are meant to pick those people up, when they fail, people end up in prison. Less than 25% of people in prison are there because they committed an act of violence. Most have experienced significant trauma. Almost 40% have a disability. Over 30% have an alcohol and drug problem or a mental health problem. We're warehousing the most marginalised and disadvantaged, and governments seem happy to spend millions building more and more prison beds, but not investing properly in drug treatment or support programs for young people at risk. So I'd encourage you to see your role in changing the measures, because by changing the measures, getting better outcomes, I think we change Australia, and we can refocus some of the public discourse around values instead of just economic figures and who's got the most money. Once again, thanks to the AMP Foundation. A special thanks to Dean and Andrew. It's a very difficult time in an election campaign. I don't know that many of us truly understand the pressure on people during election campaigns to take time out and to work through with Morris and the National Press Club to make this happen. I really appreciate all you've done, especially Dean, travelling so far. And we appreciate what it says about your support for the sector. So thank you for doing that. Thanks, Morris. Thanks, Julie. And I'm looking forward to the forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola and David. Now I invite to the stage Andrew Leigh and Dean Smith. There was a toss of the coin. Dean won, and he gave Andrew the right to speak first, strangely. So, Andrew, I invite you to the stand. You've got 10 to 15 minutes each, and then we'll be open to questions. Thank you.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Julie. Can I begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people on whose lands we meet today? Dara Nuna, Dara Ngunnawal, Yungu, Ngunnawal, Dunimanyan, Ngunnawal Wari, Dara Wari, Dindi, Wangaralan Jinyin. And I want to acknowledge too the important work that so many of you in the room do to close the gaps and to recognise all First Nations people present. I want to give a special shout out to my federal colleague Alicia Payne, ACT Assembly colleagues Caitlin Tuff, Michael Pedersen and Tamus Werner-Gibbings. Thank you, Morris, for having us here today, and Julie for moderating us. Thanks to Community Council for Australia's David Crosby and Sue Regan, who worked on this terrific, incisive report. Thank you, Nicola, from the AMP Foundation for sponsoring it. And if you forgive me, allow me to give a special shout out to my Chief of Staff, Nick Terrell, who has been working with me for over a decade on important issues of charity. There is no public servant in Australia more committed to engagement with the charity sector and to the mission of building a more connected Australia than Nick. So thank you, Nick, for all the work that you do. Over the past couple of generations, Australia has become more disconnected. Fewer of us are joining clubs. Fewer of us attend religious services. Fewer of us volunteer regularly. It's not that we care less, it's that the threads that once wove us together have become steadily frayed. And in that context, charities play a vital role. They're not just service providers, they're social glue. Whether it's a food bank service, a youth mentoring program, or a multicultural festival, charities create spaces where people connect, contribute, and belong. In a world that too often feels atomised and transactional, charities remind us of the power of purpose and the strength of solidarity. And that's not just an abstract idea. In the room today, we have representatives from some remarkable charities in the Canberra region, making a real difference and allowing people to thrive. We have Hannah Costello and Vanessa Brettel from Stepping Stone Cafe. They are Australia's local heroes as a result of setting up a work integration social enterprise cafe, which exists to provide employment and training to migrant women from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. We have Genevieve Jacobs from Hands Across Canberra, a terrific community foundation which supports hundreds of local charities, providing them with the resources they need to flourish and connect communities in Canberra. We've got philanthropists Glenn and Mel Keys, who through the Aspen Medical Foundation do so much to support global health internationally and disability projects in Australia. We've got Saffron Zoma from the Australian Democracy Network, whose flagship political advocacy training program has helped skill up countless charities to better engage directly with parliamentarians. We've got Hannah Andrevsky from Roundabout Canberra, who works with social workers and support workers to distribute essential everyday items to families in need. We've got Kirsty Baker from the Hackett Tucker Box, who has been out there every Saturday afternoon providing food to low-income families who really need it. We've got Ben Gathercole and Martin Fisk, the heads of terrific local charities, Men's Link and St John's Ambulance. And they're just a small sampling of the many organisations that are working to make sure that the bush capital is also Australia's social capital. Charities here that are working hard to build community, as charities do across the nation. From start-up charities such as Orange Sky Laundry to well-established charities such as Vinnie's, whose CEO Sleep Out is again just around the corner. When disaster strikes, it's charities that Australians turn to. Last month I declared the ex-tropical cyclone Alfred a disaster under tax law for the purpose of establishing disaster relief funds. That's just one action that allows philanthropists to help rebuild and assist with less visible aspects, such as the impact on mental well-being of disasters. And we see it every day. Just a few hours ago, the Prime Minister stood up alongside the St Vincent de Paul Society and the Leichhardt Women's Community Health Centre. My party values the work that charities do, and we value the role of advocacy on policy. I've had the privilege of having the charities portfolio for my party for the past 12 years, and that's allowed me to connect with charities and to see the vital work they do in building community. Over the course of the last 3 years since coming to government, we've made important strides in our work to rebuild community and to strengthen charities. We've appointed a widely respected charity sector expert, Sue Woodward, to head the Charities Commission. We've refreshed the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission Advisory Board, with Sarah Davies as its head and representatives from First Nations communities and called communities. We have a youth voice on the Charities Advisory Committee, and we've brought an additional layer of regulatory oversight by engaging with states and territories to allow them to have representatives on the Charity Sector Advisory Board. We've sent a clear signal that charitable advocacy is supported and welcomed by the Albanese government, whether it's arguing for us or whether it is critiquing the work that we do. The voices of charities are valued as an important contributor to the public debate by our government. We've worked with state and territory governments to streamline and harmonise fundraising rules across jurisdictions, a reform that had too long been put in the too hard basket, but which we are delivering on from government. We've improved the deductible gift recipient system by creating a new pathway for community foundations to access tax-deductible status. Community foundations, a Canadian initiative, now exist in the Bass Coast, in Alice Springs, in the Eyre Peninsula, in Albany and Fremantle, and of course right here in Canberra. They are an important part of our vision for building a more connected Australia, in which Australians are able to connect with one another, donating locally and helping join up different community organisations to build more connected communities. We've streamlined the deductible gift recipient application process for environmental organisations, harm prevention charities, cultural organisations and overseas aid organisations. This means that these organisations can now get the deductible gift recipient status within a matter of weeks, not a matter of years. We saw under the former government the Grace Tame Foundation having their charitable status deferred for partisan reasons. That won't happen under us. We've begun consultation on an increase to the annual distribution rate for public and private ancillary funds, to be renamed Giving Funds, a recommendation of both our Historic Productivity Commission report into giving and the not-for-profit sector blueprint. We've encouraged Round Up for Charity fundraising by removing the requirement that a gift must be at least $2 before a donor can claim a tax donation. In a cashless age, Round Up for Charity is becoming a popular way to give. And as part of our goal to double philanthropy by 2030, we're enabling those charities to better operate and creating new incentives for Round Up for Charities. We've introduced legislation to give the Charities Commission more discretion to comment publicly on harmful breaches of compliance, to better support public trust and confidence in the regulatory framework. The vast majority of Australia's 62,000 charities do the right thing. But where a charity isn't doing the right thing, and it is in the public interest for the regulator to speak out, we need to do that to ensure that we have the trust and confidence in the sector. We've funded a new general social survey with new questions on participation in volunteering, involvement in cultural events and cultural activities, and providing insights on participation, on giving, and on purpose-driven activity. This not only supports the wellbeing framework that the Treasurer has put in place, but has also been an important ask from the sector. We need to be better measuring how communities are connecting if we're to rebuild community together. And the new General Social Survey will do just that. And we've carried out the largest ever consultation with Australian charities, holding charity forums in every Australian state and territory capital city and online. In most cases, multiple forums. And we've worked on impact and evidence. I'm wearing today my I Love Evidence badge. Most of you know I'm a bit of an evidence nerd. And we've really enjoyed the opportunity to work with our new Australian Centre for Evaluation with the Paul Ramsay Foundation's experimental grant round, providing support for charities who want to put in place randomised trials to assess the impact of what they do. We've held a charities workshop with academics in order to better support those charities who want to evaluate their programs. Now, I want to keep these remarks positive, but it is important as we go into an election to recognise that we're making a choice. And it's important to remind people as to where the sector was at in its relationship with government under the former government. It is no exaggeration to say that the 9 years under the Coalition saw a war on charities. The Coalition came to office under the Abbott government promising to abolish the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, to take us back to case law from the 1600s as our way of managing charities. They couldn't get that legislation through the Parliament, so they finally backed down, and when they did the next best thing. They appointed Gary Johns as the head of the Charities Commission, a measure akin to putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank. This was not an appointment that was welcomed by the sector. It was seen by many for what it was, a direct attack on charities. That meant that charities who were supporting women's disability communities found themselves under heavy scrutiny from the Charities Commission. We saw under the former government attempts to end advocacy for environmental charities, attempts to prevent legal affairs charities from advocating, attempts to stop advocacy by social services charities. We saw the formation of the Hands Off Our Charities Alliance, which, under us, has been rebranded the Stronger Charities Alliance. I think that says a lot about the relationship between the sector and us. We saw 3 successive open letters to Liberal Party Prime Ministers calling on them to back off their attacks on charities. So, and even today, we have calls by coalition frontbenchers to strip the Smart Energy Council of its charitable status. So my challenge to Dean Smith is, will you admit you got it wrong? Will you admit that under the former government, the approach to charities was too adversarial? Will you commit that under a coalition government, there will not be a wind back of the protections to advocacy that we've put in place? We know that the coalition on issues such as the public service are taking its inspiration from Doge, which even right now in the United States is going after non-governmental organisations. Charities need more than a listening ear. They need a guarantee that there will not be backsliding if Peter Dutton was to become Prime Minister. Now, we're optimistic about the next path forward. We've got that target to double philanthropy by 2030. We're already acting on the recommendations of the Blueprint and the Productivity Commission report. And I acknowledge Christian Siebert here in the audience, one of the authors of that terrific, important report. These are long-term reform projects, calling for significant reform to the deductible gift recipient status. We've already implemented some of those reforms, but we intend to do more, working in collaboration with the sector. The Blueprint in particular is a reform project with a 10-year horizon, and I note Joe Barrakett's comment recently encouraging charities to identify parts of the Blueprint that the sector can push forwards, and I know that's happening. We've worked on the cost of insurance, something that the Community Council for Australia has called as a significant issue. I've written to state and territory treasurers following a roundtable with the Insurance Council on high public liability costs. We want to do more on sector capacity, recognising that there are at the moment important initiatives that could be joined up, such as the work on starting a charity from Justice Connect, on cyber risk from Info Exchange, and on leadership from Benefolk. You have a strong commitment from Labor that we will work with the Stronger Charities Alliance on the recommendations you've made on charitable advocacy to further strengthen our commitment. You have from us a government which is calm, methodical and engaged, which values charities and wants to build a more connected Australia. That means backing our charities not just with warm words, but with smart policies, reducing the reporting burden, encouraging giving, and making it easier for good people to do good work. Because when we strengthen civil society, we build more than programs. We build trust. We build belonging. We build a nation where no one is left out and everyone has a role to play. Thank you. Look forward very much to your questions.
Well, may I also begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you, Julie, and to everyone at the National Press Club. If the House on the Hill is the beating heart of our democracy, then the National Press Club is its brains trust. And of course, thank you also to our sponsors, and thank you all very much for joining us here this afternoon. If I was to wear a badge, it would say, I love action. I'm grateful to come to this meeting, to this gathering, to continue what's been a vital conversation over the last 3 years on our charities sector. Since becoming the opposition charities spokesman just 3 years ago, my door has been very wide open to the sector, listening to your challenges and sharing your hopes for the future. As I've been out and about in the community, starting with visits in late 2022 and 2023 to Adelaide, to Moree, to WA's Kimberley region in my home state, to name just a few, the challenges that organisations have faced there were real, and the need for practical solutions was and continues to be urgent. 3 years have now passed under the Albanese Labor government. And again, I've been visiting many charities in the last few weeks, in Queensland, in Western Sydney and the Mornington Peninsula, especially those which focus on the vital work of food relief. And unfortunately, the situation has not improved. After 3 years of this government, the situation is unfortunately more desperate than ever. Labor policies heralded 3 years ago have been allowed to lag, practical initiatives are nowhere to be seen, and process has been dressed up as outcomes. The sector has been left to feed, clothe, house and counsel record numbers of Australians, many of them for the first time, through the government's cost of living crisis. Our charities and not-for-profits are in many cases literally keeping people and communities alive. And while the Albanese government remains in power, they are doing it alone. That's why in Brisbane South last week, with the opposition leader Peter Dutton, we announced $19.5 million from an elected Liberal government to build a new Food Bank Queensland distribution centre. It's part of $69.5 million, a $69.5 million commitment to the food relief sector over 4 years beginning on the 1st of July this year. The $50 million announcement, announced in the budget in reply speech, will be made up of $20 million over year one, $10 million being given to 3 nationally funded food relief organisations, Food Bank, Oz Harvest and Second Bite, $10 million for other charities also providing these services around the country, for things as simple but as necessary as a new freezer or a delivery truck. And then a further $10 million for each of 3 years from 1 July 2026 to continue to support the important work of Food Bank, Oz Harvest and Second Bite. The Coalition believes these are significant, immediate initiatives that will change and improve the lived experience, not just of local charities and their volunteers, but those who are in desperate need. I don't need to tell you that the sector and its clients are doing it tough. You are living it. But look at the numbers. They tell us and they remind us that the story is getting worse. Real household disposable income has collapsed by 8% under the Albanese government. The ABS reports that basic foodstuffs, including bread, breakfast cereals, fruit, eggs, cheese and cooking oils, have jumped by at least 20%. Nearly 2 million households in our country experienced severe food insecurity in the past 12 months. More than half of those have at least one person in paid work. And RBA data continues to confirm that the number of Australian mortgage holders running at least 3 months late on their repayments has increased in every state and the ACT over the last few years. There has been opportunity alongside these challenges, opportunity for genuine reform, to improve giving, to build a stronger sector by making it easier rather than harder for charities and not-for-profits to operate. These are goals that we are all supportive of. Frustratingly, these opportunities have largely been lost. Great expectations surrounded the Productivity Commission's efforts and the ambition of doubling philanthropic giving by 2030. But the report was underwhelming. Not my words, words that have been shared with me from the sector. At best, it represents refinement over transformation. But its work is not completely lost. Many of you will be interested to know in how we should progress the proposed DGR system reforms outlined in that Productivity Commission report. And I will be interested in hearing from the sector in terms of how DGR reform can be progressed. But it's important to recognise also that the report itself expressed some caution, noting that making assessments about which classes of charitable activities should be within the scope of the DGR system is challenging, subjective and contestable. Key policymakers, including the government and the opposition, have rejected recommendations affecting the DGR status of school building funds. And importantly, the report has also observed that the effects on overall level of giving are expected to be relatively modest, adding that there would be a net fiscal cost to the budget. But I can say this with great confidence. DGR reform is still very much a work in progress. The Coalition's door is very much open, and I'm sure it will be a high priority of both the new government and the new opposition in the next Parliament. But of course, the real opportunity for transformation is not with the DGR, but through philanthropic giving. The Coalition has a strong record of tangible policies to support philanthropy, including the introduction of prescribed private funds by the Howard government, the provision of DGR status to 28 entities associated with the community foundations by the Morrison government, and it is to the philanthropic part of the giving equation that the practical effort must be applied if we are to realise a genuinely new world of giving in this country. The Coalition's first step will be to engage with the Fundraising Institute and Philanthropy Australia on a clear, agreed plan to uplift giving. This will be a Coalition priority in the new Parliament. The not-for-profit sector development blueprint, also a matter top of mind to many of you, I'm sure. Let me tell you, the Coalition understands you when you say that there is a need for a plan that looks to the medium and longer term. We understand the importance of strengthening relationships between government and the not-for-profit sector. We understand the importance. We understand that effectiveness depends on an enabling environment, and we understand the centrality of decisions around funding and procurement. I commit in front of you here today that an elected Coalition government will engage in a comprehensive consultation process with the sector on the blueprint across all its 18 initiatives. But more than that, I announce today that a Coalition government will escalate our consultation with the sector by convening 2 ministerial-level roundtable discussions within the first 6 months of being elected. The initial roundtable will be convened in the first 3 months. The discussion of that first roundtable will focus on improving cyber security protections, reducing the regulatory burden, and establishing greater contractual certainty in charities and the not-for-profit sector. These are issues that have been identified in discussions between you and myself, and importantly, they are key themes outlined throughout the blueprint. The timing of this process is a conscious one and would allow for matters that have been progressed and agreed to be imported into the budget process in year 1, ensuring timely implementation. I want to highlight 2 experiences in 2024 that confirmed for me personally and for many in the sector the Albanese government's refusal to consult with the sector before making major policy decisions or to acknowledge when policy implementation was failing. In both cases, it was left to the Coalition in the Senate to give impacted charities and not-for-profits the voice that the Albanese government had denied them. Having mismanaged the rollout of the new not-for-profit tax reporting requirements, the government left hundreds of small community organisations in limbo. Stakeholders reported a lack of careful implementation, conflicting information from the ATO and an unsustainable administrative burden. Some considered winding themselves up. Understandably anxious, these stakeholders attempted to raise the issue with the Albanese government through their peak bodies, with no success. Frustrated, they came knocking on my door. With the support of independent and Australian Green senators, the Senate agreed to establish the Senate Economics Committee inquiry into the issue. The government and the ATO maintained their silence, but affected organisations, many of them small and volunteer-run, could finally have their say. Their verdict was overwhelming. One witness assessed the government as so far out of touch, while the Community Council of Australia's David Crosbie himself told the Australian Taxation Office, "You call that consultation, I call that a dismissive approach to our sector." The committee's final report now provides a pathway for improvement, one that is more sensible and proportionate in reconciling the policy ambition with the burden of implementation. If elected, the Coalition will introduce thresholds that exempt smaller, low-risk, not-for-profit entities from completing the self-review assessment requirements, extending the deadline for the return of the not-for-profit self-review assessment, and explore with the ACNC the appropriateness and practicality of the Commission itself managing the self-review assessment regime in place of the Australian Taxation Office. My second example will be more familiar to this audience. It goes to the heart of whether this government is really listening to your calls for improved funding certainty and building a professional workforce capacity, whether it really does appreciate and value the uniqueness of your sector. Last year, the Albanese government embarked on changes to the Fair Work legislation that limited the ability to hire staff on repeated short-term contracts. As you know, these contracts are widely used by the sector because they generally align with annual funding arrangements. Peak bodies shared their concerns with the government, attempting to consult on the proposed changes. The real-world urgency of the issue fell on deaf ears. Again, doors were closed when they should have been open to the sector. Again, the Coalition came to the sector's aid using the powers of the Senate. The government was forced to the negotiating table and the sector secured a temporary exemption while an acceptable longer-term solution is to be found. The Community Council of Australia again in its newsletter said that the Coalition had helped force the issue onto the government's agenda and ensured our voice was heard. The current exemption expires in November 2025 and it's now time for the Albanese government to explain to the sector what it will do to find a more suitable and permanent solution. Australians are already making their choice at the ballot box, with early voting having begun yesterday. And while I'm grateful for all of the complimentary remarks about me travelling all the way from Western Australia, it has relieved me of my pre-poll responsibilities for probably 3 days. But Australians are already making their choice at the ballot box, with early voting having already begun. That choice is between a government that has overseen a historic fall in living standards and the Coalition, which has a plan to restore budget discipline, get the economy on track, and importantly, be there with an open door for the charity sector. It is also, like I have said, a choice between a government that has failed to progress key reforms for the charity sector, failed to consult with it, and at times actively damaged its interests, and the Coalition which understands the sector's needs, a Coalition that has responded decisively with action and results when asked to do so, presents a serious commitment for further reform and progress that will advance your interests. So in conclusion, let me end where we began. And that's actually with a comment made by the AMP Foundation's Nicola Stokes in her forward remarks to the Australia We Want report. And what did Nicola say? Nicola said, persisting with the same approaches to the same issues often results in limited effectiveness of our interventions. Ladies and gentlemen, great to be here at the National Press Club. Not Andrew's first appearance, but certainly my first appearance. Let me end by paying tribute to the Australian charities and the not-for-profit sector across our country who do a remarkable job. I do that not just as a parliamentarian who represents them, but as someone who is involved with them. I'm the patron of my local tennis club. I am the patron of a redress support service in Fremantle, Western Australia. I'm a proud Rotarian. There are two sorts of people in the world. People like ourselves, who are joiners, and the rest of the world. So in speaking to you today, I do so not just as a polite participant, not just someone who has a parliamentary responsibility, but someone who is actively engaged in the world that you all live in as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you both very much. My question will be to both of you, and it's going to take us to the rest of the world. I'm just been thinking about international aid and the Trump factor, shutting down US aid and the ripple effects of that across the world, including to aid organisations in Australia and the interactivity of all those organisations. In addition to just the sheer enormity of that decision by Trump, there is concern that China might step in to fill the brief. In light of this, what is the government and the coalition's thinking around dealing with this hugely complex and very big problem? Andrew, I'll start with you.
Thanks, Julie. It's certainly something that's close to my heart. When I was a kid, I grew up in Pahang in Banda Aceh in Indonesia, where my parents were working on an overseas aid-funded, AusAid then funded project. And I've seen firsthand the impact that Australian aid makes in places like Myanmar and Bangladesh and other countries like that. It's certainly the Trump administration is pursuing the policies they said they would pursue of disengaging with the world and pursuing a more isolationist stance. We have certainly made the case to our American friends that we don't believe that that is in the interests of the United States, and it's clearly having significant impacts around the world. We need to be stepping up our engagement in the region, and certainly under us, the overseas aid program has been a key part of our engagement in the Pacific. I'm still bracing myself for the possibility that the coalition will announce cuts to foreign aid, as the then Abbott opposition did in the final week before the 2013 election. I think that would be a significantly retrograde step for Australia, both in terms of the good that our aid does and also in terms of the soft power that our aid program represents. Perhaps Dean can rule out that that will happen, but given that we haven't seen the coalition's costings, that concerns me a great deal.
Dean?
You're quite right, large and complex. I've been someone who has seen firsthand the benefit of our foreign aid program. In the last few years, a number of projects that I have been involved in my broader parliamentary career have seen the safe passage of 320 Burmese Christian refugees across the border from India to Australia. They had been not able to travel to Australia despite the fact that they had Australian visas because the Indian government would not give them exit permits. So that is something I saw firsthand on the border with India and Burma. Worked very, very closely with Australian officials here in Canberra and in Delhi, and can see the very strong and real benefit that a strong foreign aid program brings to regional security. I'm not the Foreign Affairs spokesman. I think, having made a $21 billion defence commitment like the one that's been made today, it would seem counterintuitive or counterproductive to then remove foreign aid funding at a time when a vacuum is clearly emerging. We know, if we take the Myanmar example, we know that the risk there is growing Chinese and Russian influence. We know that where vacuums get created into the international order, people fill them. And more often than not at the moment, they are filled by our opponents. So while I can't make a commitment about what our foreign affairs or foreign aid budget might look like, it would strike me as being counterproductive.
Thank you very much. Our first question is from Greg Tom from Community Advocate. Or you
Hi.
are a community advocate.
Yeah, from the Community Advocate.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
I'm suffering. I don't remember retired these days after 4 years. It goes up and down. So long
Well,
hair
we
and a
can
tie in a hot
recognise
room. I'm hanging on. Thanks, gentlemen, for taking the time. My question is around. There's been a lot of talk of reform. We mentioned the Berg report, Productivity Commission report. I think Andrew, you mentioned the fundraising, achieving uniform fundraising laws across the country. My question is really about the pace of that reform. The question is addressed to both of you, but perhaps, Andrew, if you want to take it first. We, and my colleague Andrew Schultz, we hear a lot from the sector. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of hope when a report gets commissioned. The report comes out, it's chock full of recommendations, which the Berg and the Productivity Commission report are. Then there's inevitably a delay. Some things have been ticked off, which Andrew mentioned, and Dean mentioned some of the things that you'll look at if you're elected to government. But would you acknowledge that there's sector frustration, a lot of people in this room, about how fast this is happening, and commentary tends to get back to, we've seen this before, there's been previous reports, best intentions, but they can just sit there and, it takes forever. And what's a reasonable amount of time to, the Berg, I know the Berg asked for a comment from the government by 31st of March, which didn't happen. You may say these things take a lot of time, there's an election on, a lot happening, but perhaps, do you think that's unfair, that those assumptions about the pace of reform that are going on at the moment?
Andrew, I think you need to go first.
Absolutely. Well, first, thanks, Greg, for the work that you do in being a voice for the sector and providing a conduit through which these conversations can happen. We don't have enough charity sector media in Australia, and your writing is absolutely critical in that. So thank you for that contribution. I'm a runner, so I'm always keen to get to the finish line quicker, and on issues like charitable fundraising harmonisation, I would love to see us moving at a quicker pace. But we're now at a stage where all of the jurisdictions have committed to their roadmaps, and the legislation's gone through everywhere except Western Australia and Queensland, where election timetables have been a challenge. In terms of the Productivity Commission and the Blueprint report, I went through in my opening statement a range of the reforms we've already implemented, ensuring that we have the legislation that allows the Charities Commission to speak out on breaches, implementing the reforms around the $2 donation threshold, beginning the consultation around increasing the minimum donation amount from what were previously known as public and private ancillary funds, or now known as giving funds. All of that is putting into action work that is recommended by these important reports. We didn't commission these reports so they could sit on shelves gathering dust. We commissioned them and so we could get working on them, and we're moving quickly on that process.
Dean?
I'm at a distinct disadvantage here. I must be the most impatient person in the room, in all seriousness. I think one feature, and I've shared this point with some of you, I think one feature about the last 3 years that is different from as long as I can remember, and perhaps even Andrew can remember in his 12 years in the role, and that is that this position, one of the executive office bearers, shadow executive office bearers, has had the position from the Senate. So something for you to think about. Would the representations and the consultations and the temporary resolution to the Fair Work issue have got resolved if there was not someone in the Senate making the case for the sector? That's for you to answer. Would the matter of the ATO implementation of the not-for-profit self-assessment issue, would many, and your paper has, publication has written on this extensively, would all of those organisations throughout the community had their voice heard if there wasn't for a Senate process, a Senate mechanism? The real achievement The real work that has happened in the last 3 years has happened through the Senate processes. And I'm delighted to be a bit of a Senate nerd. I'm someone who enjoys being a senator, sees the value of the Senate. I do not accept that reform has to take a long time. I'm a senator who has introduced a bill into the Parliament that got passed by the Parliament in a relatively short time and drove significant social reform in this country. I know how the parliamentary process works. Some advice though for the sector. If you make demands of government and oppositions this big, they are much harder to pursue and much harder to implement. And that's why, while I've been critical of the Productivity Commission process, and I'm a Productivity Commission fan, I'm disappointed with the process, I'm disappointed with the outcome, but like I said, I'm also an optimist because not all is lost. And the opportunity has to be to break up the philanthropic parts of that report, because that is where I think we will get the transformative change in giving in our country, not in the DGR reform process. I just do not think that given the cost of living crisis, what is happening across our communities, we can be patient in the way that the sector has demonstrated great patience, I'd argue, with the government over the last 3 years. I do not accept the point that reform has to take a long time. I absolutely do believe if you get the process right, you get the outcomes right. But there has been a lot of spinning of the wheels in the last 3 years, I would argue.
Thank you. Our next question is Noah Seckham from Community Radio Network.
Thank you both for speaking. My question is more to both of you, of course, but it's for many who want to volunteer. At the moment, it's simply not a reality that's feasible because, as we're all talking about all the time, especially in the last 4 weeks, cost of living is front of mind for everyone. Housing instability, employment instability is still an issue for a lot of people, and the barrier of entry is still so high. So for, I guess, as a government, where can you intervene to incentivise volunteering for the everyday Australian that's still trying to make ends meet as of 2025?
Well, thanks, Noah. I'm happy to kick off on that. We've funded the National Strategy on Volunteering as a way of looking at opportunities to get more people engaged in the sector. That national strategy has looked at opportunities to get people volunteering who haven't previously volunteered and creating pathways for people who are more marginalised, people with disabilities, to be able to give their time. Connecting people up with great volunteering opportunities is something that Australia does well. The Seek Volunteer and Go Volunteer websites are extensively used and have been important in terms of finding people a role where you're not just having an expert in bookkeeping, painting fences, but they're being connected up to a charity that really needs a pro bono bookkeeper. We understand the pressures that families are under, but I'm also struck when I'm out in the community, when I'm doing charities for them, by the hunger to give back, the enthusiasm among young Australians to give their time to a cause bigger than themselves, the sheer number of people who are out in Clean Up Australia Day, and the way in which innovative organisations like Puddle Jumpers from South Australia are tapping into their own volunteers as sources of new volunteers. There's a whole lot of innovation going on in the sector as to how to attract and retain volunteers, and we do know that there is that helper's high. Each of us in the room have had that opportunity to give our time back to a valued organisation and have seen the benefit that the mentor gets as well as the mentee. When I think of an organisation like Men's Link and the work that it does here in Canberra. We're committed to working with the sector on volunteering. We're really enthusiastic about an Australia in which more people have the opportunity to volunteer more often.
I'm sorry, but you didn't answer the question, which is what is the government going to do to help improve volunteering rates?
Well, I went directly to that though, Julie, with respect on the National Strategy for Volunteering. I mean, that was the first time a government had funded a strategy of this kind, and it's a really important strategy, which I'd encourage people to read, developed in partnership with Volunteering Australia, the sector peak body that does so much to connect volunteers to the opportunities that charities need.
Sure. Dan?
I'm interested in two things. Volunteering is driven by the circumstances that are taking place in the broader community. So when we have a situation, a good situation of high levels of employment, that is going to restrict people's ability to volunteer, even if they want to volunteer. So I'm always curious about how the sort of the broader economic and community dynamics are sort of fostering or hindering volunteering. I do a lot of work with the grandparent carers in Western Australia. And many of them talk to me about how they would love to be out there volunteering, but of course they now have the sort of the day-to-day, 365 days a week demands of caring for their grandchildren for a whole variety of reasons. So I'm conscious that volunteering trends will change depending what's happening in the broader community. But the thing that I'm most interested in is how we use digitisation. Everyone, even my parents who are grandparents, have phones. How do we use the digitisation to make it easier for people to volunteer, particularly where they might want to do that episodic volunteering? They discover they've got half a day tomorrow, they discover they've got a few hours on the weekend. How do they connect to that local community that they're in? People don't want to have to travel a far distance, but they also want to be involved in things where their community is involved, because I think that's where they get the highest sense of personal value and that strong sense of purpose. So those are the two things that are most sort of, that speak to me when the volunteering question comes up. I hope that answers your question.
Could I ask just one follow-up?
Very quickly.
Thank you. One of the other big discussions is around tax reform. Could this be a space where, you do get a better tax rate if you are giving more time back to the community? Is that at all a consideration?
It's often been put to me. What we're doing is working within a challenging budget envelope. We obviously delivered those two surpluses, but the budget pressures are very real. So in the current context, the main things that we're looking at are around the Productivity Commission's recommendations on reform of the DGR system. The Productivity Commission didn't come back to us recommending the kind of reform you're talking about. In a world of infinite resources, you jump at every idea. In a world of constrained resources, we're looking at those where we think we can have the biggest impact. And I think that probably is around deductible gift recipient reform. I'm a bit troubled that Dean's taken that off the table, because I think...
No. Door wide open, high priority in the next Parliament, not off the table. Not off the table. But I did remind the audience, and yourself if you were listening, there were in the PC report some qualifying remarks. It's not true to say that the DGA reform initiative proposed in the PC report is unanimously agreed to. Not at all. And in fact, you have, like we have, rejected an important element of that around school building funds. But if I could answer the question? Mm-hmm. Yep. I think you make a really valuable point. There will be a tax reform debate in this country. And what is the sector thinking about in preparation for that tax reform debate? I know that Andrew would like to be involved in it. I'm interested in being involved in it. So when that tax reform debate happens, as it must in this country, is the sector prepared to meet that opportunity with ideas, initiatives that are sensible, that are believable, and then do provide that transformative change that I've been talking about, and importantly, have gone through that exercise where people know, yep, this is something that the sector would like, but it already enjoys high levels of community and broader public support for whatever that tax initiative might be.
And just to finish my answer there, so it is really important when you come to an election to have policies to put forward. Back in 2022, we had a comprehensive charities policy saying not only door will be open, happy to meet, but here's what we'll do. Target of doubling philanthropy by 2030. A whole set of specific reforms as to what
But Andrew,
we put in
the
place.
door was closed on two very important issues.
To simply say, you've had a good go, Dana, I didn't interrupt you.
Thank you.
And to simply say the problem with the current government is process and we'll have a couple of roundtables, isn't to announce the sort of clear costed policies that Labor came forward with in 2022.
In response to that, I would make this point. A commitment to ministerial roundtables in the absence of demonstrated action over the last 3 years would be a shallow promise. That is true. But I hope that those of you that have been engaged with me, like David Crosby and others, know that not only was I quick to respond, the responses were cleverly thought through and, more than that, got outcomes. So in the absence of a record of achievement in the last 3 years, I think you're right. Ministerial roundtables sound rather shallow. But I am someone who drives outcomes. I'm someone who works to get outcomes for people because I can see the transformative benefit of what's being talked about. My fear for the not-for-profit sector blueprint, well written, heavily printed, is that it sits there idle and nothing happens, because when people hear about a 10-year plan, guess what happens? They'll think about it in year 8 or 9. The problem with the Productivity Commission report is that of the recommendations, many of them were actually findings. Many of them were regulatory in their nature, not transformative. And the one that and I'm surprised we haven't had a question about it yet, the one on the how do we progress DGR reform, I think is the most important, is the most urgent. But the pathway to that reform is not in the PC report, Andrew. It is not in the PC report.
Okay, next question, please. Matthew Schultz, Community Advocate.
Hello, Matthew Schultz here from the Institute of Community Directors Australia. I'm actually...
I apologise.
No, that's all right. I'm actually Greg Tom's offsider, so we're fully loaded as far as community sector coverage. I would love to thank the CCA for hosting this excellent event. My question really is to you, Dr. Leigh, and it relates to the ATO self-review return, which obviously Senator Smith pointed out. Now, that is one... We know that your government has a big priority on reducing red tape for community organisations. They're busy enough as they are. But the ATO return is possibly an example of some of the worst aspects of that. It's extremely frustrating for many people. There's only about a quarter of the 100,000 odd community organisations that actually lodged the return. Are you going to consider at least some of the suggestions that Senator Smith has made, which reflect some of the sector concerns about changing those tiers, reducing the impost, and also considering giving the ACNC the opportunity to take charge of this? People certainly trust that organisation. And many people are afraid of the ATO, myself included.
Well, thanks very much, Matthew. And it's important to say at the outset where this reform came from. This wasn't a measure that was initially put in place by a Labor government. This was a measure that was put in place by Scott Morrison's government. Scott Morrison's government put in place a requirement for not-for-profits to do this form of reporting. But when we came to office, we discovered that they hadn't put in place the personnel that would have been required and the systems that allowed that to occur in a seamless fashion. We set about making sure that a policy that the Coalition had put in place could actually be workable. We understood the intention behind the reform to provide greater integrity to the tax system, but also the importance of ensuring that eligible not-for-profits weren't excessively burdened. We stood up additional staff within the Australian Taxation Office. We reached out to all parliamentarians and to peak groups. I wrote to every parliamentarian, every member and every senator to provide more detail on these reforms. We've worked carefully with peak bodies in the sector in order to minimise the cost, the time cost of lodgements. I'm a big believer in reducing regulatory burden, and our goal has been to make sure that this reform, this coalition reform, was implemented in a way that was minimally burdensome to organisations. We've engaged in a bipartisan fashion, and I do find it strange to be sitting next to a member of the coalition who is attacking a coalition policy, which we have done our level best to implement in a way that minimises the impact on the sector.
Dean?
Andrew said this very clearly. The government supports the integrity measure that the Morrison government put in the budget papers of 2022-23. So the Parliament is agreed on this measure as an integrity measure. I do not know why the sector's recommendations around thresholds and those sorts of things were not agreed to by the former government. I still do not understand why the current government has not agreed to those thresholds. This is now an issue of implementation, and the implementation by the Australian Taxation Office has been appalling. Not my words, the sector words. And I got the letter that Andrew sent to parliamentarians, that you'd expect, but that is not consultation, that is not reform. And the Senate inquiry process made it very, very clear around the country, volunteer organisations getting letters from the ATO. ATO implementation is so poor. I had private meetings with the Australian Taxation Implementation Office as well, and I was so underwhelmed with the information they were providing me, I took it to the floor of the Senate and we got a Senate inquiry. So this actually could be, thinking positively about the situation we're in, this could be a moment where Andrew Leigh and Senator Smith are united. They agree in the integrity measure. They're disappointed in the ATO implementation arrangements. I say, why didn't the coalition in government accept recommendations from the sector around thresholds? Andrew says, why didn't Labor Party in government accept suggestions around thresholds included in the Senate Economics Committee report? And we start the new parliament with a reformed process. That's my challenge to Andrew.
Thank you. Okay, final question, Genevieve Jacobs, hands across Canberra.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Morris, for this opportunity. It's always wonderful to be in this room, and many thanks to Community Councils Australia and the AMP for this excellent report. I'm delighted to see that the ACT actually tops the national indicators for a flourishing community. Collaboration is our superpower in the ACT. We are bloody good at it, and I want to also call out all the people in the room who work together to make that possible. Minister Leigh and Senator Smith, you've both spoken about trying to streamline giving. We've had some fairly technical conversations about the kind of levers that you can pull. I think there's still a widespread sense in the Australian community at large that it's government's responsibility to meet need. So I want to ask you about a bigger vision to mobilise beyond funding grants, beyond quite transactional single cause giving, to how we can engender a sense of personal responsibility across the community as a whole, to really step up and through, for example, community foundations, take responsibility for building a better community together. And perhaps, Senator, to you first.
Thank you very much. Well, we might actually be able to end on a high note here. We might actually be able to, because I do think that the work of the community foundation, and Andrew did mention this in his remarks, the work of the community foundations have been very, very good. I think they're high impact. I particularly like them because they are genuinely local. I am someone whose political philosophy says that decisions can be made locally and local people can be trusted to make local decisions. So it fits neatly my, worldview in that sense. I've had some recent conversations. Australia is at the forefront when it comes to community foundation work. So I think if Andrew and I were given the challenge, how are we going to work together in the new parliament? Me as the minister, Andrew... we'll toss a coin. Then it may well be in the space of community foundations that is where we can find that common agreement. Because it is worth saying that while there are points of difference, and there has to be points of difference if you're going to have a critique of where things are at and where you want to go, not everything has to be contested. Not everything has to be contested. I'm sure that Andrew would agree with me on that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, and the work that community foundations do is really deeply valued by our government. We see not only the funding streams, but also the ability to mentor new startups, the ability to join together organisations that are working on similar issues but might not be aware of where they have fresh opportunities for collaboration. We see the ability to increase volunteering by encouraging donors to also give. So community foundations are a terrific model for what we want to achieve as a government. But I do need to sound a note of caution, which is to remind people that for all of the discussion about how fast we move forward on all these reforms, that we are moving forward under our government. That's not the way most charities felt the last 9 years was going under the coalition. They felt the car was in reverse. And to be complaining, I think, about the pace of reform, you first need, as an entry into that conversation, to be able to say, we're not going to hit advocacy. We're not going to be cutting funding to overseas aid. We're not going to be going back to the bad old days of the war on charities. That is the environment from which we've come, and we're very pleased to be working with such terrific community foundations as we have across Australia to build that more connected nation.
Thank you. Now, before we thank our guests for that robust and honest discussion, I'd like to present them both with a gold membership to the National Press Club. So please, thank you. Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. That was great.
Thank you.